Here we go. Hello, everyone. I do a show every fortnight called Midatlantic. I've been doing it for some six years now. And the whole idea of the show was to talk about US and UK politics, to compare and contrast it from one side of the Atlantic from another, because on a personal level, I started traveling and spending 6 months of my year in the United States, but I'm also somewhat of a proud Englishman, a proud Brit of Jamaican heritage. And it was a way of me to try and understand both of those two countries. Way back then, I started doing the show with this gentleman here, Mic Wright, who I've always thought was a great mind, a very incisive and very clear thinker. What I thought we'd do today is, in effect, do Mid-Atlantic Live on intelligent speech. So we've done half of the show where we've looked at the UK and US news and politics in the last week with Doug Levy and with Emma Burnell. And the second part is going to be this session. And we are bereft of two Americans that work, who really believe in direct action and actually protest. That's Dee Perkinson and his wife, and they work for the Action National Network, which is the Reverend Al Sharpton's political movement, an organizational movement. So fingers crossed that they will join us. But if they don't, Mick and I will just have a conversation about Black Lives Matter, identity, and from the perspective
Hello, I'm the whitest man in the world, so...
You are, but Mick, many Black Lives thought leaders have actually said the problem is for white folks truly to understand the position of Black people, and quite simply, what is it more that you want us to do? Now, I'm not saying that you are a proxy for all white people by any stretch of the imagination, but we're going to have a lot of American viewers right here and now. So first off, why don't we take a look at how the killing of George Floyd has actually affected the United Kingdom in the last month? Here's the thing. We've had statues being taken down, torn down, pulled down, graffitied within the United Kingdom. Famously, a statue of a philanthropist, slave trader, murderer in Bristol, somebody who'd given lots of money off the back of the fact that he
Edward Coulson, whose name is on everything in Bristol.
It's on a lot of things in Bristol, through to Cecil Rhodes, who many Victorians, well, not even just many Victorians, Rhodes scholars. President Clinton was a Rhodes scholar. He's given that much money to Oxford and to various UK institutions. And up until relatively recently, Cecil Rhodes had a whiter than white reputation.
Only to idiots. Only to idiots. Like, that's not true, because of course Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes, So to anyone who had any awareness of the Black liberation struggle in Southern Africa, and that includes many white people, including a former Labour MP, Peter Hain, who was involved in the liberation struggle as a white guy in South Africa. Many people already knew that Cecil Rhodes was a problem, and it's worth saying that the tragic and horrific death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, has acted as a catalyst to some of this stuff. However, Rhodes must fall. The demand that Rhodes' statue be removed from the Oxford College is a couple of years old as a thing, and wasn't really being treated properly by the authorities until this point. So the catalyst of a more radical political movement happening now has meant that people are actually listening, and Rhodes' statue hasn't been pulled down by the people. It's being taken down has been taken down, or will be taken down by the college authorities. So while Coulson, the people in Bristol have been trying to get the Coulson statue taken down a long time, Bristol has a black mayor, which is a factor. People have said, why didn't he get it taken down before? But he was elected just after Brexit. And as he very sensibly said, had he started pulling down statues, he would have been pegged as an angry black man, and it would have been politically neutralizing for him on things that he's trying to do day to day to improve the lives of people in Bristol, particularly as Bristol has massive economic inequality, a lot of rich people, very kind of cheechy kind of place, but also a lot of economic deprivation there. And that doesn't get talked about a lot. Plus, Bristol is the absolute starting point for the United Kingdom slave trade. It is, patient zero.
It's ground zero.
Yeah,
absolutely. The optics of the mayor of Bristol and his deputy, they're both black. And
they're incredible guys. They're incredible people. Sorry,
and she's a black Rasta. His deputy. It was really pretty stark, but it does show you the real politique that actually needs to go on. That as you said, he couldn't just pull it down. But those debates had been going on in Bristol for a long time about how to. What do you do with these statues? People
kept asking, and what people keep saying is, they should have done it democratically. They tried. Sorry, Roifield, carry on.
No, they absolutely did. And as I said, I was really shocked when I went to Bristol at the age of, when I was 20, so that's 30 years ago now, that a friend of mine, and he was not making a political point about this at all, but he was driving me around and he said, so this road is named after a slave trader. This one's named after, and it was street after street and whatever. So you're completely right.
The other thing that's worth saying is back then, even back then, or around that sort of time, massive attack. Great interracial Bristol band have refused for years to play at Coulston Hall, the main sort of venue in Bristol, for that reason. They just will not play there because obviously they're a mixed race band and they're not going to play somewhere with a slave trader's name on the marquee. So
Oxford is forced to come to terms with its road.
A small part. A small
part. Even Baden Powell has taken some heat. The founder of the Scouts movement. Where do you sit with corporate Britain? People like PG Tips and Tetley getting behind the Black Lives Matter hashtag and having Blackout Tuesdays, etc.
I hate it. This morning I saw Goldman Sachs putting out their Black Lives Matter thing, and it really is, it's vomitous in its in every aspect of it. We should not tolerate these companies doing this, because look into the history of most of these countries, and particularly tea companies who have exploited India for so long. It is not it is not about companies. What companies should do is just give money to grassroots groups. Just give money to grassroots groups. That's all I care about. But that's the only way they can make the symbolism is fine, but most of them aren't really putting their money where their mouth is. And what's more, there has never been a British born person of color at the head of a FTSE 100 company. There have been black chief executives and people, Asian chief executives, but never a British born one. So the fact is that British business is racist in its boardrooms, right? It just is. It is not. It has not yet been possible for a black, Asian, or any other minority ethnic executive to rise to the top of one of our countries. So until they start making changes there, these gestures are just bollocks.
Are they though? Right?
No, they are. Come on, they are.
One second. And
I know you're king centrist. And you're just going to pull that stuff.
I've also got to play devil's advocate to a degree. I've also got to try and be the voice, at least of some of the listeners, of the viewers. I'm Tetley T, right? And I thought that 2 weeks ago, for people that don't know, about 2-3 weeks ago, I think it was Yorkshire Tea.
Yorkshire Tea. Yeah, that was right. They did Yorkshire
Tea which is a big brand of tea, and American listeners will know us Brits like our tea, basically said they were supporting Black Lives Matter on social media, to which one person replied, well, I'm going to take my custom to PG Tips, which is a rival brand, as big, if not actually bigger than Yorkshire Tea. And PG Tips says, we don't want you either. And it created a 5-minute media moment, which was funny, which you felt like the ground underneath you was changing, because these two iconic British brands were one second, Mick. For people that aren't part of the left of centre media bubble, of which most people aren't, okay? If I am, and this is the example that I use, if I'm Mabel and I'm a 65-year-old woman, white woman in Hull, and on the news,
is this who you cosplay as on Twitter?
Absolutely. I dress up as Mabel. I have the rollers in my hair all the time, right? And on the news, I hear that Yorkshire Tea are supporting this. It might give me pause for thought to think that the world needs to change. Why is it that my tea company is supporting this? Because
I think you're kidding yourself. But let me tell you something that I actually think. Let me tell you something that I think is actually making a difference, right? And a few months ago, it would have pained me to say this, but every morning on Good Morning Britain, Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid are sitting there and putting out messages about racism and the issues around racism and what Black Lives Matter actually means. Kathy Cox, you're right. There is nothing wrong with being 65.
I didn't say that was. I didn't say that was.
No, but I'm just saying to Kathy that she's right.
I know,
but
I can see that. But the whole point. The whole point was.
No, let me finish my point about GMB, because I'm going to get off the point here. But what's better than the two white hosts of GMB saying that is that every morning they are having panels of often 4 or 5 black people, of black academics, black activists, black radicals, being on one of the most watched TV breakfast shows in Britain and allowing them to speak largely unencumbered. I mean, I will say the other day that Piers Morgan tried to get Dizzy Rascal to talk about Black Lives Matter, and Dizzy, who was on there to talk about a fun concert, basically went, and I totally agreed with Dizzy on this, went, what, am I the spokesman for black people? I'm here to talk about fun stuff. I'll talk about Black Lives Matter when I want to talk about Black Lives Matter. And that's important as well, I think, because there seems to be this thing where you made this joke at the start about me being the spokesman for white people, but I also think...
I said you're not.
No, but it was a good joke, right? But anyway, the point I'm making is we should also allow black creatives to be on shows just to talk about fun stuff and not always have to go, so what do you think about slavery? Because, like, it's really kind of a bummer. Like, if I got you on to talk about your Archers podcast, which is very good, Dum De Dum, check it out, you wouldn't then go, and then I went to you, so the cops killed George Floyd, what do you think about that? You would reasonably say, come on, man, I'm here to talk about the Archers, and it would be nice for me if I could do that without having to always talk about racism.
Okay, the very fact that Piers Morgan, somebody who's not known for his liberal views.
He was liberal when he was the editor of the Mirror. He's got a history of liberal. Yeah, he's got a history of some liberalism,
And then he seemed to have run right to the right wing, apart from with Brexit. But like, he was a Trump supporter until very recently, or at least a Trump apologist.
He's never been a racist, though. He's never been an outright racist.
But what he has said. I don't
want to defend him, to be honest. I don't want to defend him.
Sounds like you're trying to, right?
No, I'm just trying to provide balance, which you're obsessed with.
Wait a minute. One thing that Piers Morgan does embody is a certain level of male, middle-aged privilege in terms of his view of the world. His default position comes from there. It absolutely does. And for him to at least take half a step back considering he has such a powerful pulpit, as you said, it's one of the biggest shows in the United Kingdom. Whenever I'm in the United States and I check up on UK news, invariably there's one or two clips from that show every day, which
it's very good at leading. It's very good at getting itself and leading the agenda. Like, it's very, very good at it. The day after, a black guy pulled a white racist protester out of a mob and saved his life, they had him on GMB. They were interviewing him and his boys on GMD. And what was good is that the host gave that group of really admirable black men plenty of time to talk. Like, plenty of time to talk. That's my thing with it. It's like, look, I'm not whatever about Piers Morgan, but that show is doing a good job of allowing people to talk.
But for me, though, Mick, it's doing a job.
Can we just address Kathy's done a couple of good comments, and I think it's worth addressing. Yeah, Kathy, we know you're not dinosaurs, and that living through the anti-Vietnam period is good.
Kathy, I think you misconstrued my question, because I did clearly say Mabel doesn't live in a left of centre social media bubble. I clearly said that.
Can I also say, though,
so I'm not saying it's all 65-year-olds.
I didn't grow up in a left of centre bubble, right? You grew up in Birmingham, right? In a really diverse, multicultural place, right? Well, actually, a place where, it's actually more of a black majority in some areas, which is just fact. Whereas I grew up in Norfolk, one of the most white homogenous areas in the country. So I know how people who don't come from the left of centre bubble think, because I often go back and talk to them, right? So it's not like I'm some kind of metropolitan elite guy. And Kathy, this white equals racist at a basic level thing, I don't know about that.
With that. Kathy, I don't agree with that either. And I think we have to be very careful, because there are many people.
She's making a point about stereotypes. Yeah, fair enough, Kathy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but we do have to be careful that we don't demonize people for things which they can't help, and their skin color is one of them. And dare I say it, coming from a race of people who have been demonized for 500 years because of the way that we just look, that we're not good, we cannot achieve, we cannot aspire, and we are wrong. So I would never flip that the other way around. I absolutely wouldn't.
But you know what was interesting? When I was at university, I had a friend called Robin Sivapalan, who's some Sri Lankan guy, really big Sri Lankan guy. He's a radical now. He does a lot of radical politics now. He always was then. And I remember having a big discussion with him, which at the time I struggled with, where he said, people of color can't be racist. They can only be racially prejudiced, right? And he had this big hang up around the semantics of racism versus racial prejudice. And at the time, I just didn't have a lot of time for that argument, because I felt like I felt it was a kind of screwing around with the language to say. But actually now I get it in the sense of questions of power dynamics. That said, I've been to Nigeria. I was the whitest white man in Lagos for a whole day, and it was interesting to be in an environment where I was stood out so much and looked at and pointed at, and it's not the same as experiencing racial prejudice or racism for your entire life, but it was an interesting experience, to suddenly be in that world of, like, I was having people asking me about my hair and, like, why are you so white and why are you here and all this kind of, and it's interesting. And, like, the Nigerians were really nice to me, but, like, in a nightclub in Lagos where everyone else is black and literally everyone else was black, it was an interesting experience. Now, I've been in predominantly almost all black environments before, because I was a hip hop fan in my teens, went to clubs quite a lot to watch black artists where there weren't a lot of white fans, but that's still not quite the same, because we were all British and I could communicate with them on the level of, like, I just like hip hop. And if you could prove if you could show the knowledge, then people were like, cool, we'll let you in because you've done the work.
Yeah. This is your time, folks, to ask questions. I'm sorry that two of our speakers have not been able to make it. And Dee Perkinson does great work. He's one of the leaders of the New York chapter of the National Action Network. So he does have a lot to contribute. And what I wanted to do was really drill into really where Black Lives Matters goes now. Mick, as much as we can, let's have a conversation about that. Obviously, Black Lives Matter is an organization which doesn't have a leader. This isn't the 1960s in America with that Dr. Martin Luther King with a figurehead.
But there are leaders, and there are people
but there are thought leaders, but there isn't somebody you can go to and say, "Oi, mush, what do you want now?" And there aren't, the question is, does that
Hi, Kathy. No, no one was going to say some of my best friends are black. although one of my best friends is in the other window here, and like he is manifestly black. So I don't know what to do with that. But no, you're right. But the other thing is, I think we sometimes make a category error about a lot of Black liberation struggles, whether it be civil rights or whether it be the Black liberation struggle in South Africa, to think that there were never factions or that one leader was listened to above all others. And, we know, look, even if you just go in civil rights struggle and say Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, they weren't diametrically opposed, but they did have very clear political and strategic differences between them. And the same thing goes in South Africa, is that there were, even within the ANC, you've got factions and different arguments about how to pursue the struggle. So Black Panthers as well, exactly. I don't think I don't think Black Lives Matter is that different. The other aspect with Black Lives Matter, of course, is you've got Black Lives Matter, the philosophy, and Black Lives Matter, the organization. And often right-wing pundits will hone in on certain things that Black Lives Matter as an organization or as a group have asked for, certain kind of Marxist vibes, certain things that things around defunding the police that not everyone who's a BLM supporter would go for. Now, I'm fairly radical in some of the things that the more radical demands amongst BLM I would get behind. But a lot of people who say, who say Black Lives Matter and believe it, don't also go in with the political program.
All right, Mick. I'm being told by the moderators here that we need to ask for questions because we need to start to wrap this up. So this is your chance, folks, to ask for questions. By the way, Kathy, I think you have communicated your humour.
Yeah,
we did know that you were joking. Eric Johansson says racism in the USA has such a very different history compared to pretty much everywhere else. I often feel that using a template of how the US to look to other issues and other countries to hide. Okay, didn't quite understand the second bit, but
no, I get it. I get what he means. He's saying like it's not to try and apply American models or American answers or even questions to other countries. He's I think saying that he doesn't believe that's an efficacious way of doing things. I actually disagree. I think that racism in the UK and in the US actually have a lot of things in common. One of the differences is that our police don't have guns, so fewer black men are shot to death by the police. But if you look at our death in custody figures, it's not. If I go into jail versus Roifield going into jail, I'm much more likely to come out alive, and that's the case. And so the notion that our police are less racist is something that people say a lot here. It's just actually the tools of applying their racism are less deadly.
Well, there are some structural differences, and this is a well-trod conversation for me because I bounce between the US and the UK all the time. So fundamentally, there have only been mass non-white Britons since 1948, 47, forget which one it is. So there is a very big structural difference. Yes, there have been the odd occasional black Brit beforehand in the 18th century, the 19th century, but like in real numbers, we're only 70 odd years old.
Oh, there is an argument to say there were quite a few during the Roman occupation, but that's a different.
That's 2,000 years ago. So there is a very large structural difference there. Also, the patterns of ethnic minority living are very different in the UK, in the US. So in the UK, there literally are not any black neighborhoods. There's neighborhoods where there's more black people that live. So you might go Hackney, you might go Dalston, you might go Southeast London. But
I used to live in Hackney.
As recently as the 1970s, in my hometown of Birmingham, Handsworth was known as a black neighborhood. That doesn't exist anymore. And specifically with brown Brits, so people from the Asian subcontinent, yes, there are still pockets of where they live, and they would form the majority. So Burnleys and Northern Mill towns, or let's say Southall, but even they're becoming much more diffuse. So it's much easier. One second, Mick. It's much easier for the police in America to over police an ethnic minority neighborhood than it actually is in the UK.
But it does happen here. It does happen here. It's happening in London right now, and it is happening more. It is happening more. And the other thing that's happening is gentrification is causing, in London at least, there to be, like, I live in Tower Hamlets, and there are certainly areas where rich areas, and then there are tower block areas which are almost entirely ethnic minority people. That's okay. Anyway, Eric's clarification on this is interesting. So he said, I was thinking more about Germany or the Nordics, where you have no populations who deem themselves as black, but rather as Somali, Eritrean, etc., and arrived in the last 20 to 30 years. Yeah, that's true. I mean, Germany's got some issues with that because, look, the far right is back on the rise there, and there are integration issues. But that said, there have been Holland's had that issue. Often it's to do with if a country, the receiving country, has a very strong notion of national identity, then it's hard for immigrants to find their way into that national identity, and I think that causes divisions. Also, very tricky if a country's got a strong history of the far right, which the Nordics also have as much as Germany.
Question from Ben Jacobs. I know him. He says, serious question. How much of an impact does the globalization of US media impact this issue? I'm going to say massively, Ben. In my time alone of going over to the United States, bearing in mind that I'm aware that I move in a certain bubble.
Milieu.
So many of the people who I speak to casually will mention the fact that they read The Guardian online. So many of them will talk about watching British soap operas or dramas on Netflix, etc. That there is a coastal bit of America which was always much more outward looking because it was coastal, but is much more media aware of the rest of the world. And then it does filter all the way down to Korean films getting Oscars. So I say this to people all the time. They say, oh my gosh, you live in America. As a black man, don't you feel unsafe? And I always say, I don't live in America, I live in California. The difference between those red heartland states and coastal America is stark. And it's one of the surprises that I've encountered being in America, because it is as stark as any cultural divide you would find in the United Kingdom. You know, that people just believe a whole different set of values. It's much more stark than the North-South divide within the United Kingdom. You know.
No, Luke. Roifield is talking about US media.
Yeah.
Roifield spends time in the US and he's talking about US media in response to Ben's question about US media.
But wait a minute. Is The Guardian and the fact that Netflix are actually... The Guardian has a US edition, and Netflix, some of its most popular shows are not now American.
Yeah.
That's
the thing. About. These media brands are now, like I write a daily a daily media criticism newsletter, and yeah, look, these brands. The other thing is, like, just look at, like, if there's if the Cut, for instance, the New York Magazine's kind of vertical, the Cut has a profile about some dumb celebrity, right, or some interesting online person. The Caroline Calloway thing, for example, normally that's an American story, but it hits here because everything is online, and an online story that runs well runs everywhere. Goes the same this way. The only thing is, really, the issue is the US consumes very little international news, and UK news, they consume our news, or you guys consume our news through a prism of, like, royal news, little bit of political news, but not that much. Whereas we consume lots of American news, so we're much better informed about America than
absolutely. The whole world is much more informed about America than America is about the rest of the world, but that is slowly changing, is my point. So I see Luke Baxter says, interesting, Roifield is making a point talking about UK media responsibility.
That's what I was just responding to.
But you missed my point here. You missed my point. It's people consuming other bits of media, and it really does go on much more than I think we realise. And then Ben Jake has gone, LOL. Charles Scott Kimball, hello from the Red State Heartland. I think what we've gone on from talking about Black Lives Matter to really to talk about cultural issues, and we kind of have to now kind of like wind this up.
But I think that makes sense. Just one sentence is, I think that makes sense because the culture, like Clara Amfo, who's a brilliant Radio 1 DJ, made this thing, did this really impassioned speech in the week after George Floyd died, and she said, like, you want our rhythm, but you don't want our blues. And so the culture thing is important because she was quoting someone else. Do look up who the quote was, but the culture matter does matter because Black culture. You know, some of the greatest entertainers now, some of the most successful entertainers are Black people who are accepted by lots of white people who are racist in their day-to-day lives, but are really happy to be like, I love Jay-Z, but it's like they wouldn't want Jay-Z to live next to them. So the culture thing is an important thing.
Mick, I'll let you into a story which I've told many times, and now I'm going to answer Luke Baxter's question. I was at university, girlfriend of mine, white, and she told her mother and father about me, said her boyfriend's name was Roifield. I'd never met them, they'd never met me. They came to an end of year show, walked into the kitchen to see me, shock on their face. Dad shook my hand and then walked out the room, said to his daughter, Nikki, my girlfriend, can we have a word, please? Mom burst out in tears and they said, what are you trying to do? You're trying to kill us. He's Black, right? She walks back into the kitchen in tears and says, my mom and dad don't want to go to the show with you, my end of year show. And I said, look, it's your mom and dad. They've driven all the way down here from Manchester. They'll always be your parents, right? So she goes off in tears. She comes back 2 hours later and she says, I never knew my mom and dad were racist, because my dad's favorite artist is Bob Marley and my mom's is Diana Ross. And I burst out laughing just to go and make that point. And I sat down with her and I says, look, the very fact that you can be 20 and not realize that your parents were racist actually says a lot about your parents. They weren't coming out with racial epithets day out. They absolutely weren't. And she grew up in a 99.9% white neighborhood. So the moral of that story is that prejudice is a complicated thing. But I would say that with people like that, you can actually reach out to them because they weren't confronted by Black people in their day-to-day life. And they were just shocked when they physically walked into a room and saw somebody that they didn't know, that they, didn't look like how they thought they would. Just very quickly, how useful is it to think of BAME, Black, for the expression BAME, to be lumping various ethnicities together rather than the US where African America is quite separate as a form of identity? One thing I would say about this, I absolutely dislike the fact that Black Americans are called African Americans, because white Americans don't have to qualify their Americanness; they're just called American. So it is another label, which means that you are other, and actually you're a second-class citizen. Yes, there is Italian American, but we don't hear of German Americans. We don't hear of English Americans. We don't hear of Scottish Americans. Why is it that it's African Americans or Latino Americans? So there's always a problem with labels. And I think on that note, Mick, unless you've got something...
Well, there's just one last thing on the BAME thing, which is I think BAME is useful for official statistics and stuff in a country where ethnic minorities are still quite a heavy minority. We do BAME stuff to talk about representation, but I think it's important when we're talking about, say, George Floyd, that we talk about Black people and Black people's experience, because the experience of Black people versus the experience of, say, Asian minorities in this country is quite different, because a lot of Asian people get a different kind of racism, which is they're assumed to be cleverer and more likely to be doctors or whatever, which is another kind of racism, but it's not the same racism as Black boys get.
And actually, there is a big difference if you look at South Asian Brits and their economic outcomes, because Pakistani boys and Bangladeshi boys fear much worse than Indian Brits, much worse. So yes, I think Mick is right. You need to be able to drill into this statistically, but then we need to be careful as to how we then label people kind of like going forward. And we have 1 minute. Morris Smith says it's a theory of exceptionalism. Beyonce, LeBron James. You're completely right. It's one of the things that America, one of the lies that America tells itself, that anybody can succeed. Because look at Beyonce, look at LeBron James, look at Barack Hussein Obama, even. But you look at the life outcomes of a Black child or a Latino child at birth, and they are always much less than their white counterpart. That is the rule. Of course, it will always be the odd exception or whatever. Beyonce in 2020 is the Sidney Poitier of the 1960s. Always one exception, but let's look at the lump and mass. But that's it. I think we basically have to say goodbye. And that's it. That's the end. I hope you've been royally entertained. So sorry we didn't have Dee from the Action National Network as part of the chat. Eric Johansson said that was interesting. See you again and have a great rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.